Good afternoon or good evening to our participants. Hello, my name is Bruno Acosta, member of the board of the Demand Driven Latin America, and I will be your host for this webinar. Uh, the name of this webinar is When Demand Driven Technology Will Become a Mainstream. Our presenters are Kevin Boake and Laurent Vigouroux, founder members of the B2Wise Corporation. Laurent Vigouroux is Executive Vice President of B2Wise and a Master Instructor of DDP and DDL. Laurent, please.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I'm very happy to present this webinar, and thanks, Bruno, for this introduction. And I will ask a lot of questions to Kevin because Kevin will be my co-presenter. And Kevin, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hey, Lawrence and Bruno, really excited to be here. My name is Kevin Boake. Lawrence, unlike you, I prepared a little story about myself, and not that I want to show off, but I just want people to understand my background. I'm the founder with you of B2Wise for the last 5 years. But before that, I ran a advanced supply chain forecasting, inventory optimization and planning company called Bala World. We sell the product called Optimizer. I'm an industrial engineer, so I have lots of understanding of mathematical models and optimization processes. I'm obviously educated in all the demand-driven spaces, but I've been in the industry for 25 years. I've run over 300 MRP projects over the last 25 years all over the world. I lecture at Warwick University. Warwick is one of the top 5 manufacturing universities in the world, and they sell their courses to all organizations around the world. So I've lectured in Polytech in Hong Kong. I've had the pleasure of having 190 students for 2 weeks in a lecture room and had to entertain them. It was very interesting.
Wow.
My skills are very clearly MRP, MPS, capacity, demand planning, inventory optimization, supply planning, SNOP, RBP, and now DDMRP. So that's my background. That's who I am. So when I talk today, I hope I don't want to come across as arrogant, but that's my background and who I am. And I've worked in many different sectors in this space. Okay.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, let's talk about all these projects that you've done. What are the different fields that you were playing with?
So I mean, Lawrence, I've worked with companies that are the equivalent to 7-Eleven. If people know what a 7-Eleven are, one-stop convenience stores. I've worked with tire retailers, mobile phones. I've done projects with Starbucks, their distribution. I've planned people onto some of the ships. So maybe in Mexico, people might know Royal Caribbean. In the UK, their big competitors, Carnival Shipping Lines, where you've got to plan the food that goes onto those ships. And I can go on. Of what I've done.
That's a lot.
But when I look at my projects that I've worked on, they always come down to these 3 areas. When you're dealing in planning, it's very clearly it's strategy, which is really around that long-term plan. 1 to 3 years out. What is the business thinking? How are we going to spend our money? What major investments do we want to go under? Are we going to try new product lines? Let's set the direction for the company, and that's the strategy. So some of those projects were around the strategy of the company. That then moves more into the tactical. So once you've decided on the strategy and you've chosen your production lines and you've decided where your warehouses are going to be, you've now got to get the tactics right, and you've got to then start mapping your capability to the demand from the market, and that's the tactics. And the final area that I've worked in is really the short term. This is where you into that tactics are over, the customer wants something, you need to produce, you have assets, you have inventory, and you've got to do the best you can with what you've got. And that is really the operational planning. So all those projects, if I had to design them, some of them covered all 3 areas, but a lot of them just worked on one of those 3 areas. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, Kevin. But here we are in in a demand-driven presentation. So where DDMRP fits into these different ranges?
Great question, Lawrence. So demand-driven very clearly sits inside the operational mode. And again, I can see Carol and Chad, if they're on the call, they're probably going, don't say that. But when I say demand-driven, in my words, the demand-driven MRP, the DDMRP side of this, and this is the model that most of the clients that we have worked with have implemented. And this is where we're implementing a model that is replacing MRP. Let's be very clear. We're going to clients who are using traditional MRP, and we are turning MRP off, and we're putting in a DDMRP solution. And really what we're trying to get right here is we want to generate the orders. Is what are the supply orders? Every day, what do I need to produce in order to meet my customer demand? And that's what demand-driven is. So it's a combination of MRP, of DRP. It introduces concepts of lean, theory of constraints, Six Sigma, and there's certain innovations. And it's a flow-based methodology. And the whole way the methodology works is that you first position your inventory, you then protect those positions, and you pull inventory through. So that's what demand-driven is. So in this diagram I showed you previously, it's really in this operational space that demand-driven. And when you look at most of our companies we've dealt with in the last 5 years, this is the model that we're implementing for them. Make sense, Laurent?
Yeah, that's perfect. But what's about the other ranges for DDMRP? Where are they?
So the Demand-Driven Institute have classified them very, very cleverly. So the demand-driven operating model is the DDMRP is the supply order engine of a demand-driven operating model. So it's the operational zone. But they've introduced these words called the demand-driven SNOP, and this is a place where you adapt your operating model to meet the objectives of the boardroom, which is your SNOP process, and equally you adapt the objectives of your boardroom into the operating model, and that's how that works. So when you look at a full adaptive enterprise model, this is what the model looks like. So it starts off with the boardroom saying, here are our business objectives, the business plan that flows into a demand-driven SNOP process. That demand-driven SOP process is used to configure the demand-driven operating model. The demand-driven operating model is then configured. It's then paced to actual demand, which is the demand-driven part of it. So we're using actual demand, not forecast, to drive the operating model. And then out of that, we get variances. So where did the model fail? Where did it go wrong? And then we tweak the parameters, and that's the process. So the majority of the clients we deal with today, we're working in the space where we're tweaking, modeling, and doing that. We then provide projections for customers, and those projections will then either go into the traditional SNOP process, which will then drive back into the business. Now, we obviously hell of excited. Carol and Chad have been working with Dick Ling, who's the father of SNOP, and I think in the next, Chad has showed me and spoken to me about some of the new concepts coming in their adaptive SNOP model. So we eagerly await to see that model that'll be coming in their next book that they produce in the next year or so. Chad says it'll be out in the next 7 months, I think. That's the plan it will be.
A lot of work on this field, yeah, sure.
But we're focusing right now. We are very heavily in this operating model. That's where we're sitting at the moment.
So let's focus on this demand-driven operating model and this DD SNOP. So let's go inside.
So this is how it works. You start off, you position inventory. You say, where in my business do I need to hold stock? Once you've done that, you then got to say, well, how do I protect those positions? So this is where a buffer comes in. How do I size my buffer? Then because we can't manually adjust buffers, the buffers need to dynamically adjust with the business. So there's a whole methodology on how those buffers adjust. And that's the tactics of the business. And then we start pulling. This is the operation. So every day we're placing the orders, we deciding what we need, and this is what they call net flow. So making sure I have the right amount of stock on hand plus on order, and then I execute. I have a very clear what do I make first, what do I drive to my markets first, and that's the execution side. And that's the DDS&OP, the DDMRP side. And then what happens is the DDS&OP is then looking back at the past performance. So how do we adapt? So now we've got to start looking at where things go wrong. You've got to track performance. You've got to say which buffers failed, where am I overstocked, where am I understocked, and how do I optimize my model? And this is, I think, one of the most powerful things about an adaptive S&OP model is this demand-driven S&OP. Because if you get this right and you're constantly tweaking your models and you understand how this works, it becomes a very critical process. And that's how a lot of our clients have achieved the results that they have in their businesses. Okay.
Okay, great. So let's go deeper into one point that is coming over and over again.
Don't mention capacity, Laurent, because I don't want to talk about it.
You don't want to talk about it, so don't talk about it.
Okay, Laurent, make me talk about capacity. So, Laurent, obviously capacity, I think every company we deal with has a massive capacity problem. They're always trying to understand how they deal with capacity and handle capacity. And I mean, still today, we are learning about how to manage and optimize capacity in the demand-driven operating model. You know, we've just finished a major project in North America where we've done a huge amount of developments in capacity and trying to optimize it into production line. But capacity and building capacity, I think, is an absolute core thing for companies, is how do you optimize what you have inside the constraints of your business. And that's what we're working a lot on. So there's a lot of developments, a lot of innovations that we are looking at with capacity to get clients right. The problem is every client has their own sort of capacity requirements, and we are working on them. But it's hell of interesting. What is very interesting is that it's actually our clients that drive our capacity discussions. They come to us once they've got the operating model, and they say to us, oh, how nice would it be if we can do this? We've never been able to do this. If you could do this for us, how incredible that would be. So we're very fortunate that our customers are pushing us very hard in this capacity discussion. And I think that for us in the next 6 months to a year, we're going to have very powerful technologies in the capacity space that are very, very critical, because you do need to optimize what you have given the constraints of your business. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. So what kind of clients are pushing? Yeah.
So Laurent, this is just the clients that we've got. Someone says to me, what sort of clients? There's no doubt that demand-driven started, I think, in a manufacturing space. So it was very driven by manufacturing. But it's very quickly grown out of that. It's become, we're dealing with distributors. So there's brands here people might not recognize. I take a lot. So Take a Lot is the Amazon in South Africa. Amazon doesn't have a business, and Take a Lot is Amazon in South Africa. And we provide the demand-driven technologies into a full online retailer. There is no manufacturing and just distribution. So we find that as we're working with clients, we have another client here, Closier. Closier, the latest project is one of my fascinations, is they grow chickens for KFC. So we're using demand-driven planning to actually how they breed the chickens and how they grow them, and the life cycle and the buffers of the chickens in order to make the chickens available for KFC. So as much as demand driven is very in the manufacturing side, more and more clients are coming in as pure distribution organizations, and we're going into more and more spaces. And as the technology evolves, more and more clients are coming on. I think a lot of these clients, there's one thing in common with every client on this board here, is they're hell of a frustrated with what they have today. They're looking at the MRP processes and saying, it's not working. We need to do something different. And that's what we talk about. Laurent, I think you're the biggest innovator there is. You kill me with your enthusiasm, but innovation and people wanting to just do something different. And I think that's, if you talk your own story, I think when you started demand driven in France, that's what led it. You were tired of the same old every day. You wanted something different. So that's all.
Yeah, and that this new way of thinking is not touching only Europe or Latin America. It's everywhere in the world. So that's very interesting. Yeah.
And Laurent, and I know that it's incredible. I've been working in the demand driven space for 5 years. I always joke with Chad. When I met Chad, Chad said to me he's not traveling anymore. I laughed at him. I said, Chad, why wouldn't you want to travel? 5 years later, I want to phone Chad up and say, hey Chad, you said I mustn't travel, and I look how I've traveled. The only client that I haven't visited on this list over here is the one in New Caledonia, which is a 4-hour flight from Brisbane, and that's what we've seen. It's incredible the mass amount of clients that we've got around the world. A lot of these are driven by rollouts, which is something that I've never seen in my previous client, where you implement a model in France or in Belgium, and the client will then say, that's it, we're going to roll out to 70 different manufacturing sites around the world. And those rollouts happen instantly.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. I think the proudest thing that I have on my checklist is in France. It's where you from, Laurent, you know it more than I think. If you look at that, the stock exchange, and you look at that, the CAC 40, the top 40 companies in France, 20% of those companies are either our customers, a big portion of them, or we know them very well, and they are currently trying out DVMRP. So it just shows that, and I think 5 years ago there was very little. So this technology, which is what we're going to talk about today, is exploding. We can only talk about our client base. I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there. The demand-driven software landscape is full of different people, and you see it on this list here of all the different people that we compete against. We're very excited that SAP themselves have stood up and said, "Hey, demand-driven is the way to go." And they not just SAP. I know that. Dynamics, DDMRP for Dynamics, which is D365, which is a partner we deal with. They've just got the entire suite certified, which is very exciting. So there's, so I look and say, SAP and D365, which is Microsoft, are now certified players in the space. It's wonderful to see. So you think that if this technology keeps going, it's very good.
Yeah, and so you've got different kind of softwares, ERP, APS, new players. Can you present it? Yeah.
Sure. So what you see, Laurent, is when we go into the market and we compete, we compete against certain players. So you compete against the traditional ERP solutions, and they, that's what companies will say. Hey, these companies have got certified through the industry. Then you've got the APS solutions. So these are guys that have had traditional forecast-driven, engines, whatever they've had, and they've now have built in at least some basic form of demand-driven technology into it. And then you've got the new players, who are the guys that we see, and the names you see on here. I'm not trying to differentiate against anyone, but those are the guys we compete against. So if I just said, I can't comment on the other people. I know Bruno I should actually give Bruno credit for his SPC, but I'm very excited that he's joined us. But I've seen his product; it's very good, you know. And so there's a huge amount of technologies that are coming. I estimate that right now it's hard to judge. I use my own what we are, and you know our numbers. But when I look at all the spend in the space, I estimate today there's probably about $40 million being spent in demand driven on a global basis. That's what I think. I could be wrong. You know, I think we've got to accept there could be a big swing in that. And I think also what you see is, we see it, is there's a massive growth. I mean, we look at our pipeline this year to last year, and it's just globally so much bigger than before, and so many more people are involved in our own business. So we're seeing a very big growth in the space of demand driven. But you know, that's 40 million is the size of the market, I'd imagine. That's what I think.
Yeah, but what is the bigger landscape of the supply chain planning marketplace?
Yeah, so supply chain planning, I mean, the only organization I know, and this is credit to them, is Gartner. You know, they've been around for many years. They've produced many reports. They report on supply chain planning, and you know, 2018 they put a paper out. They do a magic quadrant of the supply chain planning market, and this is, to be fair to Gartner, I don't want to, you can go and read your own Gartner reports in that, but this is the 2018 report, and they put on here their views, and obviously every year, I know there's a new report that's come out. I haven't seen the full report, and people move and play, and they have their magic quadrant, and everyone tries to get into the top corner. What's quite interesting is on this magic quadrant, we have competed, you know, against a lot of the players. So you notice even on this report, there are new players that we have replaced in certain companies that we deal with. So, you know, and I'm sure we've lost a few deals to companies along the way, but it's a market. But that's what Gartner see as their market space, and they do that ranking. But what they say is that, you know, when this report was produced in 2018, they spoke of a 2020, the market was going to be about 5.1 billion. So on a global basis, there's about 5.1 billion, and that market is growing by 8%. So it just shows you that, you know, it's outstripping GDPs and growth in most companies. So more and more companies are investing in these technologies, in supply chain planning. We always hear that, you know, I always joke, there's very few supply chain planning people on the boards of major companies, but more and more you're seeing it. People are seeing supply chain planning as being a competitive advantage. We know that from some of our clients. They refuse to allow us to publish results because they're saying, I don't want my competitors to know what we do. So it's such a critical thing for us. But, and you know that well, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But where does DDMRP stands for Gartner? It's
so Gartner, bless their souls. I mean, they produce a hype cycle every year. So you know, just you must know, Laurent, that you know and I know that we've dedicated our lives to DDMRP. It's our children,
definitely,
and,
yes,
and DDMRP. That's the way our lives work, and you're not allowed to criticize either of them. So what you've seen with Gartner is Gartner produce a hype cycle, and I have to say, when I saw this on LinkedIn, I almost fell off my chair because they put DDMRP on here. So that's a good sign. Hey, DDMRP in the last 5-10 years, it's made an entrance. I mean, we've been in the space actively for 5 years. We want DDMRP to be over here in the plateau of productivity. But for sure, you know, the number one, it's recognized, but there's this little red cross next to it on the Gartner view. And when I saw it the first time, I got a big shock. Oh, well, why is there a red cross? It's unbelievable. What don't they understand? And that's supposedly the topic of the question is we seeing of this webinar is we seeing an incredible amount of growth in demand driven, but yet an organization like Gartner is saying, well, you know, what's wrong? You know, DDMRP is not going to make it. You know, they see it as there's a lot of demand coming in for it, but they have a view that says, is it going to make it? And I think that's what we want to talk about today is will DDMRP make it into this plateau of productivity? Is it going to become a mainstream technology? That's the question we want to ask.
And that's the question. And because for each one of these technology, Gartner is publishing a deep report with a lot of insights. So let's go into this report and see what Gartner says about DDMRP.
So the first thing on the report that I don't know, and I need to have a conversation with Gartner about it, but I'm too small at the moment. But one day when I'm bigger, I'll be able to talk to them. But the first thing I always say to Gartner is it's funny because we DDMRP competes with MRP. When I go into a client, I'm never competing with machine learning, or I'm never competing with integrated business planning, or SCP outsourcing, or discrete event simulation, or auto ML, or predictive analytics, or one of our projects we're starting now is the Internet of Things. So we're about to do a Internet of Things where we're doing a predictive maintenance based on the little device that sits on a machine, and we pull that into our DDMRP model to then give the customer a view on when machine parts are going to be repaired. But it's all done off a DDMRP backbone. The first question I have is, where's MRP on this list? Is it MRP just such an underlying technology that all these technologies, maybe that's a gross exaggeration, or just assume that MRP is the defunct solution? So that's the first question I'm not sure about, is DDMRP, when I look at it, it's just a replacement to MRP. It's not a machine learning replacement, or it's not a predictive analytics replacement. That's the first question. And then the second question, and Gartner, I saw this, it was sent to me, and this is their reason. So the reasons they give for why DDMRP is not going to become a mainstream technology are these. So firstly, they talk about this basic, it's a basic form. This word DDMRP is simple. DDMRP is, it's a dumbed down version. You hear this constantly. DDMRP provides a single node. Where's the demand? I don't have this time-based plan into the future. So that's the first thing I want to address today is, what is this dumbed down version? What is it? Is it really going to work? I'm not sure. The second thing that is very noticeable in the report is this thing about forecasting. I know I've had a chat with Carol and Chad. I know I've used this often. The first customer that I worked with, Samus Kremlin in France, I spent many fond evenings with the CEO, the supply chain director of the company, and he constantly reminded me about the fact that he hadn't attended a forecasting meeting for over 18 months, and it was the best thing ever in his life. So there's no doubt that when people, because that forecasting element is such a major impact, and the thing about DDMRP is it just reduces the impact of the forecast in your life, and it's amazing, a little reduction, because people are so focused on it, the impact it has. So there's this perception in the market. A lot of people talk about, you see this claim, and I was interested to see this claim even in the latest Gartner report, that DDMRP doesn't use a forecast. And I just want to put that to bed today. I want to show you, it's incredible, the forecasting stuff that we're doing within DDMRP. So I want to discuss that. The next thing is this whole thing about AI and ML. The technologies, the bots that are being developed, the Internet of Things that are happening in this world today. Anyone who thinks that AI and ML is not going to play a role in their planning process is a fool. I don't want to use that word, but I think you've got to accept that these things are coming. And if you think that AI and ML have not got a role to play, then you're funny. We've already implemented complete ML solutions within a DDMRP model. So we've already got it working, and I'll show you that today. And the final thing is this SNOP. Is DDMRP is not SNOP. Let's be very clear about it.
Yeah.
It's not even close. DDMRP is a replacement for MRP, and SNOP, there's a new term called adaptive SNOP. So when you read this here, I think any planning solution that is not addressing SNOP is going to struggle. You can't have an operating model that has no connection with the boardroom. It's that simple. So I think that's going to happen, and that's what I'm going to go and address today in the topic that we've got. That makes sense, Laurent?
Perfect. Let's zoom on the first point, on the first question.
And just to come back to the topic, I think until these perceptions are answered, I think DDMRP will struggle. And I think that until, to all my competitors out there that I've listed here, it's best to get going in the space, because it's such a big market out there. Always the blue ocean that I was explained to by FAPEX in France. The more we all develop the technology, the more it's going to grow. So just coming into the first one, let's talk about this this basic single DDMRP is a single mode basic plan. Okay, a classic basic plan. So here's because I lecture at Warwick University. For 20 years, I've been using the same slide to explain to students how MRP works. I love it, the sawtooth diagram. I think without this slide, I wouldn't have a career. I spent 4 years at university learning how to explain this slide to people. So I'm going to take this opportunity to explain to everyone how it works. So what you have here is you have a point in time where you have zero stock. And what happens in the sawtooth diagram is you place an order. And that's your replenishment quantity. That could be your MOQ, that could be your order multiple, whatever it is, you place an order, how many days of stock you want to order, which might be a setting in MRP. And your stock shoots up to a point, so that's your cycle. And then what starts happening is you start consuming that stock. And that's the forecast. So the forecast over time, which is the time axis, starts consuming that forecast, and it consumes it, it consumes it, it consumes it, it consumes it. And as you hit that zero stock level, you're hoping like hell that a new order is going to arrive. And if your plans are perfect and you know exactly when that stock's going to hit zero, your order arrives, your stock shoots up, and off you go into your cycle. And that's what you're seeing. And the sawtooth element, the demand, is the sawtooth. That creates it, because the demand is not stable. So you end up hitting that point at zero, and away it goes. But that doesn't happen. Now, in order to hit that point, at that point over there, one lead time away from that point, you place an order. You say, I need to place an order, and then you consume the demand coverage. So from the time you place that order until the time comes in, you consume stock. And if your demand changes inside of that cycle, that plan, it means nothing, because you've just got a demand. If this is a production facility, if your demand changes, means nothing. So a lot of people tend to freeze that forecast with inside of that zone, and that becomes the time fence that they want to deal with. And that's a traditional thing. But what goes wrong? Well, firstly, as Chad always says, the supply is always delayed, and those delays accumulate. So suppliers don't deliver to me when I want. So in SAP, that would be a time buffer. So because my supplier is late, I want to actually trigger this order earlier, so I protect myself against late supply. And the next thing that happens is that it's impossible to predict demand. So because my demand is a lot quicker than I thought it was, I will hit zero before my next order arrives. So I've got a problem. So in order to protect myself against that, I put in safety stock. And that's my safety stock. And the safety stock is there to protect myself against my inability to forecast, my inability to supply. And that is a traditional MRP model. And it's time-phased, planned into the future. I've got a load of forecast, and a lot of times when I go into clients that are running MRP, they're doing this calculation on the fly. So they're going in, the system's recommending, they're validating, they're checking, is the demand right, my lead times aren't correct, what I do. I always say to guys, when you want to reduce stock, There's only 4 things you've got to worry about. How much am I ordering? What is my forecast? What is my lead time? What is my safety stock? The problem is that I've got 10,000 parts, and I've got to consider that for all 10,000 parts. So it starts getting very complex very quickly. But that's a traditional MRP model. What DDMRP does is DDMRP introduces the buffer. So they say, well, we don't really want to use this forecast. We want to create a buffer, and we want to see if we can, instead of trying to have this as a time-phased plan, we're now going to, which is made up of 2 scales. So the safety and the replenishment cycle is that side of it. So that will be my, in DMRP works, there's my replenishment cycle is my green zone, and my safety stock is my red zone. But this demand coverage is my yellow zone, which is that time between I place the order to the time how much it gets used. And in MRP, it's used the same, except that it's time phased. If you look at your average stock formulas, what's the theory for average stock? It's safety stock plus half replenishment cycle, which is your average stock. So in this diagram, it makes sense because there's my safety stock, there's my replenishment cycle, and actually half the inventory I plan never to use the safety stock. That's only plan to use safety stock if something goes wrong. And in DDMRP, I don't have that. We've now created a buffer that has safety stock. Then we have the orders, what I have on order, which is this zone over here, and then I have it on top. And the big question always, and I think people don't understand this, is why do this? Is why even consider this? Why do you want to go change this fundamental mathematical formula that is taught at every university in the world? Why go and introduce this new way of doing it? So move away from a time-phase plan to a single point. And again, just be very clear, we're working in operational mode here. So Laurent, let me ask you a question.
Yeah, tell me.
What do you think in the world today the biggest problem with planning is today? And every company have the same problem.
Yes, the struggle releasing the orders, always.
Very good, Laurent. Is every single customer that we come across, the single biggest problem is that no one places the order that is recommended by the MRP tool. And it's across every single country. Companies invest millions of dollars in systems, in training, in education, in whatever they do to get them right. They've spent a lot of money in those processes, and yet when that system recommends an order, a lot of them don't even know what the order is. It's that simple. And what do? The only way of solving this problem is they introduce Excel help. Is they are completely reliant on Excel spreadsheets. I mean, one of the clients we dealt with recently, their bill of materials data, it took them a month to update their bill of materials. That's how long it takes, because it's got to work through their system, and unless all the stock is gone, they can't delete the BOM. It's complex. So what happens is they have an Excel spreadsheet running the new bill of materials outside the ERP system. The forecast.
And then it's faster.
Yeah, it's faster and it's easier, and everyone understands it. And you know, when you go make the request to the forecast, hey, this forecast, you know, this particular location is a non-buffered location. Why is there demand there? Well, the forecast just got propagated there automatically because there's some sort of MRP rule where they haven't got those right. Because in traditional MRP, you know, buffer versus non-buffer is not an easy thing. You know, stock versus non-stock doesn't exist. And you have to zero out the forecast. So companies end up with this Excel hell. And to be honest with you, those companies that I showed you, this is the sole reason we deal with them, is that they've given up on their planning processes, and they're tired of managing Excel. And we come in and we say, hey, let's give you this bright idea. Here's a sell for you. Great idea for you. I'll tell you what we're going to do is we're going to give you a very clear signal, very simple thing, which is called net flow. New term, hell of a simple. And you know what net flow is? It's a single number. There's no calculations, there's no difficulty. We're actually going to train your planners. And I'll tell you what, bring your CEO to the meeting and we'll train your CEO too. And we'll show him how that net flow calculation works. And that's what we do. And then not only are we going to give you the single order, we're then going to track the performance. So if someone doesn't place the order, your DDS and OP process, one of the processes is we're going to sit down with them and say, why aren't you placing the order? What's wrong with my system? Is the master data wrong? Is the forecast wrong? Is the MOQs wrong? Because if you're not placing the order, you're now going to get validated. And it's incredible how when someone is given a very simple signal, so a very simple net flow calculation, you need to order on this date. There's nothing more complex, very simple mathematics. It's very easy to place those orders. And that's where I see the majority of our clients have benefited massively from, is that suddenly people place the recommended order. And that's the simplicity of DDMRP.
Yeah, that's as simple as that. And let's keep going on the presentation because we've got a lot of things to say about, and we've got 20 minutes to go.
That's great. So that works. So that the whole thing is, why won't DDMRP become become mainstream? Well, it's great in the operational zone. We see it is operationally DDMRP is working in that hours, weeks, and days. I mean, it's not there's always a debate. It's not a finite scheduling tool. It will give you a priority, but it won't create a finite schedule. I think that is, for us, the next big thing that's going to come across is getting that right. But when you start moving out of the operational zone, you do need to start providing projections. And as we've dealt with clients, some of our big clients, LFB, Louis Vuitton, have driven us down a path of saying, you know, we do need to use consumption logic in the way we do it. So, and we've done that. We've taken that demand, we've looked at how we project that. So we've created a projected ADU. So instead of using my average demand, we've now created that so we can project these buffers into the future. And now you start seeing something very similar to MRP. So now we can go and look at MRP. If I'm in excess stock, I can see the orders coming in, the excess of the inventory, and it's very easy to see, you know, why did we place these orders? And we can go back and validate them. And as the model gets operating, it starts creating the right levels. And you've got a traditional MRP model, and that's where your buffer projections will come in. And I think that as companies start maturing, if DDMRP is going to become mainstream, this tactical projection becomes very, very important. So the tactical projection is the one thing. Then what you've got to do is you've got to take that tactical projection and you've got to blow that through a distribution bill of materials requirement. So then you've got to still take that through and calculate your decoupled lead times, one of the innovations that Chad and Carol came up with, very good. And you've got to calculate the right buffers, but you've got to blow that projection down your complex bills of material structures or your network structures. And you've got to be able to do that in a DDMRP. And more as you work with clients, you've got to do it through a network BOM or a BOM network, or maybe a network BOM network structure, whatever the clients require. And as we work more and more with clients, you know, I recently did a project in North America, and we started looking at these projections. And I had a very close look at SAP. And when you start looking at these projections, you know, what we've found now is that all these material types in SAP, PD, VM, which is your MRP, your reorder points, order point manual, reorder point automatic, your non-buffer, your forecast-driven stuff, all that stuff sits, and we have to answer because those have got specific functions. So from a demand-driven model, all this functionality of lead time offsets and safety times and handling dependence and independent demand and handling constraints and doing material availability checks before propagation and the consumption logic you use, which is very traditional within MRP, and time phase bombs and bomb selections, and you know, how do you optimize if you can make things in a different way and you've got two choices. You know, people want to use less planners, so all this logic that exists has got to exist with Insider. So when people say DDMRP is simple, me personally, in the last 5 years, my complexity has grown because we are dealing with more and more complex environments because people are now actually using the technology. Is they insisting that it works, and because it's very simple, is they can understand it. And that's what happens is everything we do, they now get these run rate charts, which is the Six Sigma side of DDMRP, where you are seeing, you know, here's a recommended order, you bottom of the yellow, you should order to top of green. Oh my word, look what happened. I ordered 5 times more than I should. And why did I do that? And now that becomes the planning process where you're sitting with the planner to say, what is this? Why are you ordering? Because look at how my stock is. And that order you created, and this line here is net flow. So in the DDMRP model, you always see the MRP, which is just the stock on hand, but you see the net flow, which is why we have the yellow zone, because I want to be able to challenge my planner as to why he placed an order. And for me, this is the most powerful thing. The simplicity of DDMRP makes it successful because now we're controlling the biggest problem. People don't place the order. And we now have an absolute mechanism to control that. And I think, from my experience, that's why the DDMRP model will always outperform the MRP model, because now we have a complete control built into the methodology to make sure we place orders, and that's what we do. And
Yeah.
but be very clear. Complexity is lurking around every corner. And Laurent, you know this. The answer to complexity is very simple. How do you solve complexity and get people to understand the 3 things you do? You do training, you do some more training, and just when you finish that, you do some more training.
And that's a kind of secret, huh? That's a kind of
absolutely the secret to success. And you don't just train the planners. If you want to create a competitive advantage, you train everyone. You know, you've got to literally, in this picture, there are CEOs in this thing and there are shop floor operators. And if people understand the model, you're good to go. So don't think simpler equals basic. It's not. Simpler, I think that's the power of DDMRP. And I think as much as Gartner is saying it's simplistic, it's a basic form, I think that basic form is very critical. And I think that is what's coming. Okay, so that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I'd say that's very important on this diet, is no forecasting. I mean, I'm the first one to admit that I've actually put posts onto the internet that says don't need to forecast anymore. But let's be honest, if you don't have a forecast, how do you expect to do strategic and tactical planning? You can't. So you need to see it, and we've actually created a science around how you calculate these ADUs. And just to show you, here's a screenshot of a historical sales pattern, so you can see just how volatile the historical sales have been. And then you see a future forecast, so you obviously can't run your production based on that forecast. And that's one of the powers of DDMRP, is it creates an average demand, which you then have. But very clearly, you know, there's absolute formulas. I think every single client of ours now uses a blend of the forecast as well as the sales to calculate this projection into the future. And we're seeing incredible results with those when you start using those projections in the operational mode and in the strategic mode. With this methodology, if you wanted to, you could use 100% forecast. That's your choice. Or you could use 100% sales, or for certain products, you can use a combination of which you want to achieve. And there's rules in the DDMRP model that handle that. So for me, you know, as much as every time I read this now, I think, well, you know, it's time people actually stop saying it, because forecasts are just used everywhere. And yes, they're not as impactful in the operational mode, but if you want to use DDSNOP and adaptive SNOP, you need to have a forecast into the future. And that's important. What is very important about the demand-driven operating model is when I teach forecasting, the first thing I always teach people is forecasting What is the fundamental rule you teach anyone? Don't build buffers into forecasting. And this is one of the problems, is our sales guys are so tired of stockouts, they always just put a bit more into it. And this is what DDMRP does. When it calculates that red zone, that whole red zone is there to absorb that variability. So you have this variability factor that is going into that red zone. And the way the DDMRP model works is you're not trying to net to zero. You're actually trying to you're expecting that volatility to happen. And it's only when that volatility is too high and it breaks the buffer, the buffer breaks, you have a stock out with demand, then you have a problem. But as more and more companies start using DDMRP, people are starting to see that I can have quite a simple forecasting process, and that buffer, the methodology, can absorb a lot. And BT, one of the biggest companies in the UK, put a paper out that said, they were absolutely surprised how that buffer could absorb up to 80% of their demand variability. And what does 80% mean? Well, my forecast is 100. If I sold 180, okay, I was still able to achieve the demand. That's what 80% means. It's a big variability. So that demand, that buffer really absorbs. But DDMRP doesn't stop there. It also, because we're focusing on the customer, if you're fortunate enough to have customer demand, we have a technology that is about spikes, and we're then looking into the future to say, if I do have an horizon on my buy, let me, the moment I see a demand pattern that's higher than my average, then I want to react to that. And but not all companies. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of companies now that they don't have that horizon, but yet the methodology still works. A lot of our companies do have it, and they use that spark technology to help them secure that demand process. So just rushing through it, we're seeing every client, they're importing forecasts. We do a basic forecast calculation. We've developed our own forecasting engine. I mean, with my 25 years background in forecasting, it's always going to happen. We built that into AWS. But still, some of our companies like Amazon, they take a lot heavily promotional based. And when they forecast, they want to forecast at a group level and blow that down. So what we've done is we've just linked directly.
Kevin, we've got 10 minutes to go, and maybe with some questions and answers. So let's jump.
Okay, no problem. So I mean, we've gone and built in machine learning capabilities. We use Amazon Web Services. And you can go and use all their technologies and exactly what Amazon themselves are using to place their orders for their global sites around the world. We have access to that. And, it's a lot about, the way Amazon works is their confidence levels, and we've figured all this out with them, and we've generated. So companies want machine learning capability. We've got easily access to it. But again, now what you're seeing is the machine learning capability is driving the operating model. So that's what's happening, and I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but very simply, again, the forecast is important. Machine learning is one of the mechanisms to do it. Demand sensing is also provided by Amazon Web Services. So all those technologies are now readily available to people as long as they want to move away from that forecast-driven operational model into a demand-driven operating model, and that's what we have. So that's the machine learning side, and I think that I'm personally a big fan of it. The other one that's coming a lot is when you start a demand-driven operating model, most people start with a very roughly right method. So there's a very basic stuff. We've got clients now where we're using predictive analytics. So we're running these Monte Carlo simulations. We're generating thousands of profiles, and we're calculating a precise buffer based on a confidence level. So once a client matures, we can start really applying these technologies, and I think that's going to happen into the future. So you're seeing that, and I think that's going to happen a lot. And the final thing you're going to see, and I think is going to happen, is this adaptive SNOP. I think if DDMRP wants to go mainstream, what Carol and Chad are doing is very, very important, because we do need to have a SNOP. We need to get the boardroom more involved in the operating model. And I think that's going to be coming. So the next 5 years in demand driven, I think this is going to be the main area that a lot of people are going to focus on to get right. Lawrence, that's all
sure.
I have to say.
Wow, that's a lot, huh? That's a lot.
Sorry
So,
if I ran over. I get too passionate.
no, it's perfect. It's perfect. I know you're passionate about that, and you can speak at least 5 days long. So without stop.
And if anyone on the call wants to have a conversation with me, I love it. I really enjoy demand driven. Just link with me on LinkedIn or Laurent, and we'd love to discuss this, because it's only through discussion that we're all going to improve and get better, for sure.
Okay, so yeah, great. Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Kevin. So all the participants, if you have some questions, if you have, just engage directly on the questions on the GoToWebinar, and we'll have a answer on that.
Thank you very much, Kevin and Laurent. Meanwhile, if the participants would like to express their questions, I would like to thank you for taking the time for being here and sharing your insights, experience, and knowledge. And I don't know if somebody wants to address a question to our speakers. Okay.
That's great. That's great.
Okay. Okay. In that case, this concludes this webinar, and I want to thank everyone for participating and everyone for attending. And we hope that you will be participating in the following webinars tomorrow. That it will be the last day. And remember that the next week we will have the training sessions for DDL, DDP, adaptive SNOP, and in the third week we're going to have the simulations for DD-Bricks distribution, DD-Bricks factory, the flow simulation game, and the fresh connection. And in the fourth week we're going to hold the software demos and the success stories. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Laurent. Thanks for your participation.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Okay. See you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, everyone. Bye.